In Part 1, we explored why Native American ancestry stories became so common throughout Appalachia. Now we turn our attention to the historical environment that made those stories possible. Many people imagine colonial America as a collection of separate populations living isolated from one another. The reality was far more complex. Colonial Virginia and the Appalachian frontier became a meeting place for indigenous peoples, European settlers, free people of color, enslaved Africans, traders, soldiers, refugees, and migrants from numerous cultural backgrounds. Understanding who lived on the frontier and how they interacted helps explain why family histories in Appalachia are often so complicated today. For much of the colonial period, Virginia served as the primary gateway into the Appalachian interior. As settlements expanded westward, families moved beyond the Tidewater and Piedmont regions into the Shenandoah Valley and eventually into the mountain frontier. This movement brought thousands of settlers into territories already occupied by indigenous nations. The frontier represented opportunity for some, but it also created conflict, displacement, cultural exchange, and new communities. The story of Appalachia begins with movement. People were constantly arriving, leaving, and adapting. The Appalachian frontier was never populated by a single group. Numerous indigenous nations lived throughout the region. European settlers arrived from England, Scotland, Ireland, Germany, France, and Wales. African-descended populations also played a significant role in the development of frontier communities. Many areas became places where cultures overlapped rather than remained separate. This diversity is one of the most important realities that genealogists must understand when researching Appalachian ancestry. One of the most influential migrations in Appalachian history involved the Scots-Irish. These settlers originally came from Scotland before many generations lived in Ulster, Ireland. Beginning in the early 18th century, large numbers arrived in North America. Many traveled through Pennsylvania before moving southward along the Great Wagon Road into Virginia and the Appalachian backcountry. Their influence on Appalachian culture remains visible today in language, music, religion, traditions, and family names. Many modern Appalachian families descend from these migrants. Before Europeans arrived, indigenous peoples had occupied these lands for thousands of years. The Appalachian region was home to numerous nations with their own governments, trade networks, languages, and cultures. These communities were not isolated. They maintained extensive relationships with neighboring groups throughout eastern North America. Understanding indigenous history is essential because settlers entered existing native landscapes rather than empty wilderness. Many later ancestry stories emerged from these interactions. As colonial settlement expanded, indigenous communities faced increasing pressure. Land was lost through treaties, warfare, settlement expansion, and government policies. Some groups relocated voluntarily, others were forced from ancestral territories. Entire communities moved westward or merged with neighboring tribes. These disruptions transformed the demographic landscape of Appalachia. They also created situations where indigenous families became integrated into frontier populations. One of the least understood populations in Appalachian history is the free people of color community. These families often lived in areas where racial categories were less rigid than later generations assumed. Some descended from African, European, and indigenous ancestors. Others developed unique community identities that do not fit neatly into modern classifications. Many remained on the frontier for generations. These populations would later become the focus of numerous ancestry debates and family traditions. The frontier was a place where people formed relationships across cultural boundaries. Records reveal marriages, partnerships, and kinship ties involving individuals from different backgrounds. Not every relationship was documented clearly. Not every relationship fit modern expectations. Some families maintained connections to multiple communities at the same time. These relationships contributed to the complex ancestry patterns that researchers encounter today. Modern researchers often expect historical populations to fit simple racial categories. Frontier communities rarely worked that way. People frequently moved between social worlds. Identity could shift depending on geography, politics, economics, and community reputation. Families sometimes adopted new identities over time. Others were classified differently by government officials in different records. This complexity is one reason why Appalachian genealogy can be both fascinating and challenging. When we combine migration, intermarriage, changing racial classifications, indigenous displacement, and frontier diversity, we begin to see why so many family stories emerged. People often preserved information through oral tradition when records were incomplete or unavailable. Over generations, fragments of history survived, while details were forgotten. The result was a family story that contained pieces of truth but often lacked historical context. Understanding that process helps genealogists approach ancestry claims with greater insight. The Appalachian frontier functioned as a melting pot long before the term became popular. Indigenous peoples, Europeans, Africans, and mixed communities interacted in ways that shaped the region's future. These interactions created the foundations of modern Appalachian populations. Many ancestry stories trace back to this period of cultural blending and population movement. To understand those stories, we must first understand the frontier itself. In Part 3, we will examine one of the most important topics in Appalachian genealogy. We will explore how census records and racial classifications changed over time. We'll examine labels such as Indian, mulatto, free-colored, and white and discuss how these classifications affected generations of families. Many native ancestry traditions cannot be understood without understanding how governments recorded race and identity. The history of Appalachia is not the story of a single people. It is the story of countless communities whose lives intersected across generations. The frontier was shaped by migration, adaptation, cooperation, conflict, and survival. When we study that history honestly, we gain a better understanding of the ancestry stories that continue to circulate today. The goal is not to simplify the past. The goal is to understand it. Only then can we appreciate the remarkable complexity of Appalachian family history. Thank you for joining me for Part 2 of the hidden history of Native American ancestry claims in Appalachia. If you enjoyed this presentation, please like, subscribe, share, and follow. And don't miss Part 3, where we'll explore how census categories and racial classifications changed over time, and how those changes continue to affect family history research today.